Imagine having 3 future MVPs all on the same team, none older than the age of 24, and making the NBA Finals. Hindsight is 2020, so it's easy to look back now and talk about how the Thunder should have done everything possible to keep a young James Harden on the roster. But the more I dive into the 2012 season, the more I wonder how in the world they didn't see what was to come. Because Harden was third in the food chain next to Westbrook and Durant, that means a large chunk of his time was spent away from the ball. And knowing what we know now, it's almost jarring to see him serve as a decoy, running off a couple screens to set up an action on the weak side that frees up Durant for a mid-range jumper. He wasn't always flying around screens or hunting for opportunities through movement, but he did have high feel for when and where to position himself on the perimeter so that he could space the floor as a shooter. This really stands out when the Thunder are playing with a little more pace. As the trailer, he takes a wide angle to the opposite wing and horizontally shuffles his feet to the line while catching and gathering, so that he can pull the trigger before his defender's able to properly recover. We don't have catch and shoot numbers before 2014, but in the 2012 season, 86% of his threes were assisted on, and he hit 39%. So we can reasonably assume that he was around at least a 40% spot-up shooter, which, especially in an era of basketball that wasn't as focused on putting as much space on the floor as possible, could really move the needle. And because he was so good at converting these shots, what OKC would do is place him on the wing just one pass away from KD or Russ, which made it way harder to bring help to the nail, because that meant conceding a real high percentage shot. Here's another example. KD's initiating out of the high post, and although Kawhi doesn't commit to the ball, he's sitting in a gap, ready to rotate. Ibaka comes over to set a flare screen, and even though Harden gets pretty heavily contested, that's a shot he can hit with consistency. Those flare screens were a pretty big part of their offense. Again, you're going to see KD isolate from the top of the key, and because Kawhi's ready to help, Perkins completely blindsides him. Ginobili digs from the corner, but it isn't enough to prevent Harden from scoring 3 more points. Another reason Harden was so lethal just one pass away was because of how good he was at attacking with an advantage. Again, it's the screen from Perkins that takes his man out of the play, but instead of looking to shoot, he recognizes that Robin Lopez is forced to close out, and instead puts the ball down on a drive, getting to the rim for 2 free throws. Here it is again. Ibaka kicks it out to KD, who moves it one pass over to Harden, drawing a long closeout from Gasol. He fakes and goes, drawing help down low, and countering with a lob up top. He starts this one near the paint, and relocates into open space at the top of the key where there's nobody defending. Kawhi leaves Durant to close out, and when he's beat, that forces Ginobili to slide in front of a drive, leaving the NBA's leading scorer on an island for 3 of his own. He would always make the right extra pass like this. Westbrook collapses the paint, which leaves Jason Kidd covering both KD and Harden. Moving the ball with speed keeps the defense in rotation and ultimately prevents them from recovering. If there wasn't an immediate read to make, that's when you'd see more of Harden's on-ball skill set. He first looks to fake and drive, but Kawhi remains in position, so he pulls back in the opposite direction and hesitates to leave him in the dust before floating it over help in the paint. And if scrambling meant that a big was forced to close, it was basically a death sentence. Harden throws a vicious misdirection into a couple lengthy strides as he makes Thiago Splitter look like a traffic cone, and finishes through contact for a potential 3-point play. To leverage Harden's off-ball value into his talent with the ball, OKC would commonly run actions that start him in the right corner and pull him to his left with a dribble handoff. And what made it so tough to defend was that he could do a little bit of everything. The first threat was of course the 3-point shooting. Steve Blake jumps the screen so Harden slams the brakes, and that's just way too much room on a jumper. But when his defender instead chases him over the screen, that gives him a driving lane to attack. Kidd comes way over from the weak side to protect the nail, so he kicks it to Derek Fisher for a wide open 3. And this time you're going to see Ginobili front the action, trying to deny Harden the handoff, so he counters with a sharp backdoor cut that sets him up for a reverse lay. Because he was often relegated to a number 3 role in the half court, a lot of his on-ball reps actually came when pushing the ball in transition. He was always looking to get out and run with every given chance, and his combination of speed and length made him really tough to stop from touching the paint. Robin Lopez picks him up early to slow the momentum, so he throws a little hesitation straight into an explosive crossover to change directions on his way to a layup. The way he'd continuously cross back and forth is almost reminiscent of a BMW cutting through traffic on the highway, going right and left as he hunts for gaps to sneak through. A big reason he was able to do this so effectively was his combination of length and footwork. There was always an angle for him to stride into for a finish. The way he'd set up those lengthy strides made a fool out of every defender. The pound dribble left, straight into a misdirection gather step sends Kobe out of the play, and notice how he uses his off arm to protect the ball all the way until the release. He'd routinely move defenders through those timely misdirections and shifty strides. Ian Mahinmi bites on the right hand fake, and he's forced to swipe down at the arm to prevent 2 points. Because he was such a huge threat to get deep in the paint when attacking with pace, this is also where he did a decent amount of playmaking. And I mean, it must be pretty nice having a 3-on-1 fast break with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook streaking on either side. The vision and precision were very clearly already there. He just had that instinct for how the defense was going to rotate and how to punish them with the right passes. And every now and then, we'd get a glimpse of that real high-level manipulation. In a 3-on-2, he gathers and looks to his left as if looking to hit Nick Collison, which moves Markieff Morris away from the basket as he instead hits Durant on his right. While Harden was asked to spend a lot of time away from the ball, and a lot of his on-ball opportunities came in transition, that's not to say he wasn't still asked to initiate in the half court at times. He's always had one of the most vicious first steps in the game, so with an older Jason Kidd on him, it's an easy blow-by with nobody protecting the rim. His handle hadn't fully developed yet, but all the signs of an advanced handle were there. You can just see how sharp the hesitations, head fakes, and crossovers are as he looks to get downhill. This time it's a tween, in and out, and cross to set up a right-hand drive, but Kawhi overplays the paint, so he instead steps back for a 3. Talk about foreshadowing. If he wasn't able to get the step on his man off that initial burst, he'd drop his shoulder into their chest and generate separation for himself through the use of contact. He wasn't nearly as hefty as he'd become in Houston, but already knew how to use his body and initiate contact extremely well. By going into Gasol's chest, he's able to find a release angle that avoids getting blocked. Needless to say, it was tough to prevent him from creating scoring opportunities for himself at the rim, and when it relied on help, you'd see him punish them with that passing. Ginobili's looking to funnel him into help near the elbow, which forces Diaw to slide down from the weak side corner, opening up a skip to Ibaka for a spot-up mid-range jumper. Just your average 2012 shot. When the ball was in Harden's hands as the initiator, it was almost always pick and roll. That was his bread and butter. And remember what I said about how he'd use angles and changes of direction to cut up in transition? That also helped him run his defender into screens, creating the separation he needs. You never knew if he was going to go right or left, or use the screen 2 or 3 times before getting into his attack, and that meant he would almost always find himself attacking bigs in space. Because of the burst and length, he wanted to turn the corner on drives, this time using one of those misdirection gather steps to earn himself a trip to the line. Here it is again. He comes off the screen and turns the corner on a left-hand drive, but when he's instead cut off, he uses his body to create contact and finishes through it for 2. If there wasn't a quick angle for him to attack, with the big coming up a bit higher to slow his momentum, he had no problem just pulling back into a mid-range jumper. Or he'd reject the screen and explode into open space in the opposite direction, using those lengthy strides to sneak between 2 defenders and scoop it off the glass. Here's another example of him rejecting the screen, except this time his defender shuts off the angle, so he stops on a dime, goes behind his back, takes those 2 long steps, and just like that, he's looking at a potential 3 points. On this one, he's actually got momentum on a drive while getting into the action, and when Boris Diaw jumps out in a hedge, he hesitates for just a very slight moment as he waits for the lane to clear, then turns the corner, and it's just a runway down the middle of the paint. While he wanted to make quick scoring moves off of screens, he also knew how to read different situations and play a bit more methodical. He pauses as if looking to pull the long 2, and as soon as Duncan starts to bite, he explodes right around him on a drive. Here's a real similar play, where he leverages the threat of a pull-up jumper into a drive, except Bonner sells out to the paint, so he ends up firing from the mid-range anyways. Another thing you'd see him do that I think was less popular than it is now is coming off the screen, then to a complete stop to put your defender in jail and play in between. Bynum's back in a drop, so it's another pull-up jumper from about the free throw line. Because Harden could do a little bit of everything, and he was great at reading different coverages, this meant he had a counter for pretty much every look the defense threw at him. Ginobili's gonna go under the screen with Duncan in a deep drop, so he takes advantage with one of his soon-to-be patented step-back threes. Here's another one where Ginobili goes under, but instead of a drop, he's met with a hedge. And as soon as Steven Jackson starts to recover, he uses that space to again pull up for 3. This time it's again drop coverage, but with Kawhi chasing him over the screen, so instead of an off-the-dribble 3, it's a mid-range J. When bigs were in drop like this, he could also exploit that space as a slasher, setting up Boris Diaw with a Euro step and bump as he rolls in a finish off the front of the rim. And when the opposing defense finally decided to show him a more aggressive look, like trapping or hedging, then you'd see him pick them apart as a playmaker and create open shots for his team. Some of these reads were pretty basic, an off-ball defender tagging the roll, which leaves a shooter open for a brief moment, in this case Kevin Durant, but there's also some more advanced creation. He turns the corner on a drive and collapses the paint before firing a hook pass back above the break to Daquan Cook for a high-quality 3. One thing I do want to mention is that some of the spots in which he improved were pretty noticeable. Like right here, for instance, he wants to get the ball to Collison, and there's a slight gap in between Kobe and Jordan Hill for him to shovel it through. The same shovel that he'd probably became the best in NBA history at making, but he misses it, and the pick and roll doesn't lead to any true advantage. He'd have the right idea going into actions and knew what it took to counter the coverage, but sometimes just couldn't capitalize. It's a tough pass, but either a shovel or wraparound can get the ball to Collison here, and he just hadn't developed into that level of passer yet. Then you'd have plays where he knew what the read was, attempted to capitalize, but it just fell through, putting his defender in jail, keeping the dribble alive, and shoveling it through a tight window, but the accuracy isn't quite there. With that said though, he was still capable of making some tough passes, recognizing that weak side help is late to rotate to Collison and bouncing it through Robin Lopez's legs on the way to a dunk. I think a great display of his passing is to look at an example of him initiating the same off-ball action multiple times and utilizing each and every option. It's real simple. Westbrook sets a pin down for Durant to curl to the middle of the floor for a drifting mid-range jumper. Here it is again, except instead of setting the screen, Russ slips to the basket, and Harden hits him with pinpoint accuracy for a layup. And one more time, Steven Jackson fronts the action with nobody protecting the rim, so Harden lobs it up top early, and just look at where the ball is placed. This pass couldn't have been any better. So at just age 22, we're talking about a guy who could play off the ball in a variety of ways, create his own shot from all 3 levels in isolation or off of screens, and dime up teammates all over the floor. But I think because he was the number 3 guy, he had less of an opportunity to light up the stat sheet and truly showcase just what caliber of player he already was. Thankfully for us, We have lineup data going back to 2001, which means we can look at exactly what level he was performing at when asked to take a back seat or drive the ship himself. Combining the regular season and playoffs, Harden played about 62% of his minutes next to both Westbrook and Durant, and in that time, his box score numbers were nothing to write home about. About 15 points and 4 assists every 75 possessions, getting to the line at a decent rate and not turning the ball over, efficient scoring, and OKC's offense was buzzing, about what you'd expect from a high-level number 3 guy. When he was on the floor with only one of either KD or Russ, just 17% of his minutes, we saw a huge jump in the scoring department. His volume skyrocketed, along with his free throw attempts and efficiency. It's clear he was more involved and more aggressive, which resulted in a higher turnover rate, but the offense remained really good. What stands out most to me though is the other 21% of his time on the floor, without either of his co-stars, as the clear lead creator. 37 points, 7 assists, 15 free throw attempts, and his efficiency was actually at its best. Now, I'm not saying he could already replicate this sort of production over an entire season like in 2019, but the signals were there. And OKC still had a blistering 112 offensive rating without their main duo, which is absolutely absurd. We're talking about a guy who was ready to be given the keys, just waiting for his opportunity. And I know hindsight is 2020, but I just don't see how the Thunder didn't prioritize him. Even if lineup data was less accessible back then, his scoring numbers were about 21 points per 75 on a true shooting percentage more than 13% ahead of the league's average. You want to know how many players in NBA history have reached those marks? One other guy, Manu Ginobili, in the very same season with just 34 games played. James was a superstar in hiding, and it's no shock that he went on to do what he did in Houston. The 2012 Thunder forever etched in history as one of basketball's greatest what-ifs. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out my website and social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you thought of Harden. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.